Hmm. Hey, this is a nice mold. What is this, a candle holder?
It's a super...
Because candle holders sell like crazy. I can totally use this as a mold if it's a candle holder.
It's a super candle holder.
Cool. Let's try it out. Hit the road, kitty.
All right, so Broken Age. You played it when the first act came out and then reviewed Act 2. I've just been playing it. I wanted to have somebody for you to bounce off of. Mm-hmm. And I'm not done with the game yet, but I've gotten a little ways into Act 2, and I can kind of see where you're coming from with your review script and stuff like this. The commentary from other people sometimes feels really venomous. Do you feel like that? Do you feel like you got betrayed or swindled or that kind of thing? Or
what do you mean? Do I feel like it's been venomous, like
they took the money and then they couldn't make it, almost like they intentionally didn't make a good game.
I feel like the way that I don't think it was intentionally swindling people.
Right.
I think what it was is they had an idea for a game. They knew they wanted to make it an old school adventure game. They got feedback from the first act, and everyone said it was too easy, so they made it difficult in really terrible ways. And I think, in their quest to make a classically styled adventure game, they stuck to the script a little bit too closely. I don't think repeating past sins necessarily makes for a great video game.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's one of those things where they also had a lot to deal with. I don't think they were expecting the Kickstarter thing to blow up in the way that they did. And so the whole process has a lot of weird things surrounding it that normally don't surround.
Yeah, because this game for a while was sort of like the poster child for Kickstarter. And it's funny because even though there have been a lot of better success stories, mm-hmm. It seems like so much pressure was on Double Fine to do this amazing thing, and in a way it's like they didn't really pitch an amazing groundbreaking thing. It was just like we want to make an old school adventure game.
Yep.
So it's interesting in that way.
The only thing that I'll cast doubt on is they got all this money, and I think you look at the credits for the voice actors. You have Elijah Wood, you have Jack Black, you have all of these names, quite a few of them, and you have to wonder how necessary was that?
Right.
Did that really make Broken Age a better game? That was the only thing as I was playing that kind of raised a red flag in my mind. But I don't know.
Yeah. I know one of the things that's interesting to me is it's almost like they didn't learn from what they did with Grim Fandango Remastered, mm-hmm. because I remember there was an option in there, maybe I'm missing it in Broken Age and it's just buried in a menu, but there's an option in Grim Fandango where I could go back and I could look through the past dialogue, mm-hmm. so that if I had stopped playing the game and I pick it back up again, I'm not totally lost. I can just okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm looking for. And rather than having some stupid objective marker cluttering the screen, it's I can get a refresher that way. And I'm not seeing that kind of an option in Broken Age. Right. So, if I come back the next day, I'm okay, what exactly? I've just left exactly where I was standing, and I don't know what was going on. And it's not that like you said, Act 1 is not that hard to get through. Mm-hmm. But it still feels like that was kind of that's the weird thing. If I had gone a week, then it would be even harder for me to pick up where I left off.
Yeah. Yeah. How deep are you in Act 2? I guess is the question.
I don't think I'm that deep. I've been messing around with both characters because I just wanted to get a feel for where both of them were at in Act 2.
Yeah.
And I feel so far like Vela's is a little bit more hard to follow. Okay, wait, now what do I do? It's I just try to interact with everything until I figure out oh, okay, this is the next step.
Yeah. I feel like in Act 1, as you said, it wasn't very difficult to get through. And in a way, I almost preferred that because the strengths of this game are not the parts where you're actually playing it. Clicking on things and combining things and figuring out these puzzles is not to me, what's very attractive about this game. It's the characters, it's the writing, it's the jokes that they tell, and at times how genuinely funny it can be. And I feel like in Act 2, while there were definitely some clever puzzles, for the most part, I felt like it was falling into that worst cliche where it's like, you're not just trying to solve this thing, you're trying to solve it in exactly the way, the obtuse, weird, bizarre way that they solved it. You're trying to figure out their logic. Because there were at least 2 or 3 moments in Act 2 where I thought to myself, if I actually did it this way, it would work. Like, if you did this sequence of events, it would be totally fine. The game's just not accepting it. And that's really, really frustrating. And having recently played kind of another throwback game, Shovel Knight, in a way, it's sort of apples and oranges, but I prefer the way Shovel Knight does things, where it draws so heavily from past games, but it doesn't limit itself to past achievements. It does new things, it takes different steps, it modernizes that style in really great ways, whereas I feel like Broken Age just kind of is a warts and all approach that is, it's just not as enjoyable.
One of the things I think is interesting, though, is the perspective of somebody who was all in for the Kickstarter and was waiting for the game to come out, played through Act 1, and then waited for this other year. I think it's very different than the perspective of someone like me who, like, I'm just picking this up now and I'm playing through the game.
Sure.
And I can sort of see where the issues would be with them, but at the same time, like, for me, just playing the game is like, oh, okay, this all makes sense. And I'm a little disappointed to kind of hear that, like, there's not going to be, like, some, like, really crazy new areas. The fact that I'm going to be retreading areas is a bit of a downer. But where I'm at right now, it actually makes sense. And I just feel like, oh, later on it should go somewhere else. But it's actually interesting to see them cross over into each other's worlds and to experience them in their own way with their own perspective. And that actually is working for me. But at the same time, I can put myself in that other person's shoes and say, they waited a year for this?
Right.
Like, all this time is like, oh, and now they're back in the same place. It's a weird spot. It's a great place for a cliffhanger, but then it's followed up in a weird way.
Yeah. And to their credit, if you had not been waiting the year for this act to come out, you're just kind of playing it all at once. It doesn't feel like a game that's split into 2. The transition is very seamless. But for me, it is interesting to play it from the other character's perspective. But I feel like in Act 1, they sort of gave you a really good conflict for both characters. Vela doesn't want to be eaten by this giant monster, and Shay is really patronizingly, like, stuck on his ship. Whereas I feel like in Act 2, things don't do as a good enough job making me care about the characters in the same way. Like, Vela obviously wants to get back to her family, but it feels like because she's kind of in Shay's situation, it doesn't apply to her as much as sort of the Mog Chothra stuff did. And Shay being on Shellmound isn't... It just doesn't... It didn't convince me of that they were in serious trouble in the same way.
Right.
And the other thing, one of the biggest things that I don't think you've seen it yet, is sort of the big twist in Act 2 and what is ultimately pulling the strings. I think is like very predictable in a way and kind of thrown together. So much so that it kind of makes everything feel a little bit pointless. I was not a fan of, like, the sort of ultimate antagonist and the sort of bigger situation. But
interesting.
One other thing I wanted to bring up, thinking about old adventure games, and it was something that I kind of didn't realize until recently. Broken Age feels very, very small. When you're controlling Vela or Shay, you're on this ship that's, a few rooms big. That's kind of being a little bit too reductive. Or when you're on Shellmound, you can kind of go up into the clouds, you can go to the lumberjack's house, or you can go to the beach, essentially. there are a few more areas other than that, but that's essentially it. And I think about like even classic Schaefer-style adventure games. You think about like Full Throttle or Grim Fandango.
Right.
It feels like you're traveling like across the country. You're going to all these different cities. You're doing all this and anything. There's a scope to it that Broken Age doesn't have, and because I feel like it lacks that progression, which I thought they were hinting at with Act 1. When you're Vela and you just start at the small village and then you go up into the clouds and then you come down to the beach.
Yeah.
It feels like you're going to go to all these places. But when you realize that you don't, everything seems a little bit more arbitrary, Like it just feels confined in this really weird way that like past Schaefer games haven't had.
Yeah. Well, and going back to kind of the puzzles, I don't feel, as you're saying, like I don't feel like there's a lot of room for like extra ways to solve things or experimentation. It's
Right.
very much this is the solution, and one of the first games I played, which I don't think Schaefer had anything to do with, but was Maniac Mansion. That was, there were so many different ways to play through that game, and yes, it had the flaw of you could get into a no-win scenario and have to start completely over. But there was a lot of stuff to mess around with, and at times there was like a little bit too much because, there were things that just didn't do anything, and you just have this giant inventory full of whatever.
Right.
And that does have its issues where you wouldn't have you would have things that were super obscure and you'd have to use a guide or whatever, but you could mess around, And this
Right.
I don't feel like I could really. There's nothing that I feel like I've really. This isn't, it's just a little Easter eggy type of thing here or there. It's just everything has its specific use.
You're absolutely right. There's definitely not a lot of flexibility, which is frustrating. But I've been playing another game. We're gonna long review that's taken way too long, but I've been playing Pillars of Eternity, playing a lot of Pillars of Eternity, and I was thinking about it, and that's a game that sort of took the same approach as Broken Age, where it's just like, we want to bring back this very old style of game. And in Pillars of Eternity does it very literally as well. And that is a game that I really like. That is probably going to get a pretty high score. And I think about it, and maybe just that style of game is inherently more appealing, at least to me, than classic style adventure games, because I feel like in Pillars of Eternity, we were talking about flexibility, and based on how I built my character, I can approach a situation a bunch of different ways. When I enter combat, how I position my characters, I can do things with. Whereas, like, what I'm trying to say is, I don't know what the future of adventure games are. I think they need an update in a way.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've touched Life is Strange, but I know people have been
right.
pointing to
I
that.
haven't. That is a game I really need to get to.
Yeah, I do too.
And because, like, Telltale kind of did that, right? They tried to streamline adventure games. But they streamlined adventure games in a way where they kind of just removed a lot of the puzzle solving,
Right.
a lot of the back and forth that you get in the old ways. And I think there's room to build upon that old style. I think we just need people that are doing it a little bit better. And maybe Life is Strange is that, and I just haven't experienced it yet. But, yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think just kind of to wrap it up, I think that, I think that, as you said, like, Broken Age it's still a good game. It's an enjoyable game.
Right.
If for nothing else, just the character designs.
Yeah,
and
it's gorgeous. It really is.
And the art and the attitude and the music is really good. Just there are times where like you probably just want to like just stop and listen, because that song's not. If you keep going, then you're going to cut the song off and move on to something else. And it's like that's a good song. I'll sit around for that. So it's I think it's an enjoyable game that way. But it's it feels like, from a gameplay perspective, it feels a bit shallow.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's Double Fine is always a studio that I feel like I'm rooting for. When they announce a project, it's like this. They're doing things with this that feel really unique, and some of the aspects of Broken Age definitely have that. Characters like Mog Chothra and just the whole situation that these people are in. It feels like it has so much potential, and I want them to succeed. I feel like Brutal Legend was kind of that way, where it was doing this new thing. It just wasn't successful in the execution. I hope they keep trying. I hope they keep coming up with creative scenarios, and maybe next time they'll do something that's a little bit more captivating, I guess.
Check out my gyroscopic hypercam.
Wow, amazing work. Really good job.
Really? I didn't know you were a fan of spaceship parts.
I'm not. I just like to praise humans when they make stuff out of anything that's not murdered trees.